Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to untangle what is, honestly, one of the most spectacular, just absolute PR disasters in ancient history. We're talking about an ancient Egyptian deity who started out as this incredibly vital, powerful force of nature and eventually got completely rewritten into the literal devil. We're going to look at the fascinating, messy, and really quite human reasons behind the ultimate character assassination of the god Set.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The central mystery we are unpacking today is actually pretty simple. How does a deity go from saving the universe on a nightly basis to being systematically erased from the monuments of his own people? To understand this massive, sweeping shift in ancient Egyptian religion, we first have to understand who Set actually was. And, well, to be totally honest, that is exactly where the confusion begins.
What's wild is that the whole enigmatic nature of Set starts with his actual physical representation. I mean, think about it. Horus was clearly a falcon, right? Anubis was clearly a jackal. But Set, he's depicted as this bizarre, almost chimera creature that Egyptologists affectionately just call the Set animal. It has this weird downward curving snout, squared-off ears, and a stiff forked tail. For literally over a century, scholars have tried to identify it. Was it a stylized aardvark, a donkey, an African wild dog? Some early Egyptologists even thought those flat-topped ears were the horns of a giraffe. The fact that even his physical form completely defies categorization perfectly sets the stage for a god who embodies pure, unadulterated chaos.
So, Part 1. Meet the God of Chaos, the enigmatic ruler of the Red Land. To understand Set before the historical smear campaign really kicked into gear, we have to look at how the ancient Egyptians viewed their environment.
The geography of Egypt brilliantly illustrates their fundamental principle of contrast. Egypt is geographically split, and their mythology mirrored that reality perfectly. On one hand, you have Horus, the lord of the Black Land. That's the fertile, predictable, life-giving soil right along the Nile River. It represents cosmic order. But then, as a counterbalance, you have Set, the lord of the Red Land, the harsh, unpredictable, completely barren desert. Set represented the outsiders, the foreigners, and the wild storms. But here's the absolutely critical takeaway. One could not exist without the other. Set was originally viewed as a strictly necessary counterbalance to Horus, not his evil enemy.
You see, the ancient Egyptians didn't originally look at chaos as some inherently evil thing. They understood that, sure, storms bring destruction, but they also recognized that raw, violent energy was just a wild force of nature. It was dangerous, yes, and it required management for sure, but it was absolutely essential for the universe to function. Set was the embodiment of that raw, unfiltered power.
Of course, raw, violent energy tends to cause some friction, especially at family gatherings. And that brings us to Part 2, the ultimate family feud, an 80-year divine legal battle for the throne of Egypt.
Now, what's really interesting about this 80-year war is the sheer, rapid-fire, surreal absurdity of it all. This wasn't just a simple sword fight. It actually starts out as a legal dispute over kingship before an assembly of deities. But when the courts fail, it devolves into them literally turning into hippopotami and trying to drown each other. Then, actually wait, it gets even weirder. It gets deeply psychological. There's an episode where Isis, Horus's mother, tricks Set into eating lettuce laced with Horus's semen to symbolically prove Horus's dominance, because in Egyptian tradition, semen was viewed as this potent, almost poisonous substance of power. The whole conflict ultimately culminates in brutal, mutual mutilation. Set loses his testicles, representing a loss of his chaotic virility, and Horus loses his eye.
And that mutilation of Horus is incredibly significant. Horus was a sky deity, so his right eye was the sun, and his left eye was the moon. When Set steals or tears out the eye of Horus, it physically represented the darkening of the moon in its lunar cycle, or even the terrifying occurrence of a solar eclipse. When the eye is finally restored by the god Thoth, it represents the moon returning to full brightness and order being restored to the universe. So even in their brutal warfare, Set and Horus are basically just acting out the mechanics of the cosmos.
But here's where the story pivots sharply. Let's look at Part 3, Protector of the Sun, the hero at the prow of Ra's bark. Because despite all that violence and conflict with Horus, Set held a position of unparalleled honor.
This is just pure, unadulterated heroism. Every single night, the sun god Ra had to travel through the perilous underworld on his solar boat. And every single night, the boat was attacked by Apep, this massive, terrifying serpent that wanted to devour the sun and just end all of existence. And who was the only god strong enough, violent enough, and chaotic enough to actually fight off the ultimate serpent of destruction? Set. The god of chaos was the only one capable of defeating the ultimate force of uncreation. He was actively saving the universe and allowing the sun to rise every single morning. The guy was a champion.
So, if he was the universe's ultimate bodyguard, what on earth went wrong? To answer that, we move to part 4, the foreigner's god. We have to transition completely out of ancient mythology and step into real human sociology and geopolitics. The shift really begins with a group called the Hyksos. During a time called the Second Intermediate Period, around 1650 BCE, the geopolitical borders of Egypt basically shattered. The Hyksos, who were Near Eastern peoples from the Levant, moved in and actually gained control of Lower Egypt. Now, because Set was traditionally the god of foreigners in the desert, the Hyksos naturally gravitated toward him. He felt familiar to them, sort of like their own storm god Hadad. And we actually have primary sources documenting this exact shift. Papyrus Selye I tells us, King Apophis chose for his lord the god Seth. He did not worship any other deity in the whole land except Seth. This exclusive worship by an invading foreign power planted the very first, tiny seed for Set's future PR disaster. He was now heavily associated with foreign occupiers.
However, the Egyptians eventually rebelled and expelled the Hyksos. Now, you'd think that's the exact moment Set gets canceled, right? Well, surprisingly, no. His reputation actually survived the expulsion of the Hyksos for quite a while. The military families of the New Kingdom had deep ties to Set. During the 19th dynasty, powerful pharaohs proudly took his name, like Seti I, which literally translates to Man of Set, or Set Knocked, meaning Set is strong. Even Ramesses the Great erected monuments celebrating Set. For a time, his raw martial power was still seen as a massive asset to the Egyptian empire.
But, empires don't last forever. Welcome to the climax of our explainer, Part 5, the demonization of Set. History is written by the victors, and when Egypt's fortunes permanently turned, Set paid the ultimate cultural price. Let's look at how this builds up over time. We start with his prehistoric origins as a desert god, move right through his patronage by the Hyksos, see his integration into the military might of the Ramesside period. But then we hit the late period. During this time, Egypt suffered a series of devastating, repeated invasions and conquests by foreign nations. First the Nubian Kushite Empire, then the Assyrians, and finally the massive Persian Empire. Egypt was repeatedly subjugated by foreigners. And because Set was the ancient god of foreigners, the traumatized Egyptian populace basically turned all of their anger, their resentment, and their geopolitical frustration directly on him. The historical revisionism was absolutely brutal. He was completely stripped of his heroic traits. Instead of the guy who saves the sun god, text began to hyperfocus solely on his role as the treacherous murderer of his brother Osiris. His image was physically chiseled off and erased from older monuments. Later on, the Greeks equated him to their ultimate monster Typhon. Over centuries, he was whittled down from a complex deity of cosmic balance to a pure, unadulterated symbol of foreign oppression, the literal devil.
And this right here is the incredible aha moment of the whole story. Mythology literally became sociology. The ancient Egyptians couldn't strike back at the massive Persian Empire, so they struck back at the symbol of the foreigner within their own culture. They projected their real-world trauma, their loss of sovereignty, and their growing xenophobia directly onto their religious narratives. Set wasn't actually defeated by Horus in a myth. He was defeated by human geopolitics.
So the crucial point we need to take away is this. The stories we tell about heroes and villains are almost never static. They are fluid reflections of the anxieties of the people telling them. It really makes you wonder, if a god who once stood at the prow of the sun's ship to save the universe could be slowly, methodically rewritten into the literal devil just because borders changed, what modern cultural narratives are being actively shaped and rewritten right now by our own current events? It's a pretty fascinating thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this ancient mystery. Keep questioning the stories you hear, and I'll see you next time.